Bonjour everyone, I am Anne-Lise Cailliez and welcome to Parlez-Vous CEO, where we ditch the corporate talk and get real about entrepreneurship. Each week, I chat with founders and CEOs who build businesses their way, through the failures, pivots, and breakthroughs. And they bring the fire. Plus, I'll drop some golden nuggets of wisdom from my own entrepreneurial journey. This is your space to grow, learn, and evolve with a true growth mindset. Remember, success isn't about perfection, it's about persistence. Now let's kick things off and get this party started. Hello, bonjour, bonjour, hello. Welcome to another episode of Parlez-Vous CEO, and I'm super excited about our new series around mental health and CEO. My name is Anne-Lise Cailliez, and I am your host. I am so pumped to have an old friend of mine, Dr. T, with me, who is going to be with us to talk about anxiety, CEOs, how to navigate mental health in the workplace, and when you're a high achiever. And Dr. T is a psychologist based in New York, an author, podcast host, and a CrossFitter. So that's really how we met. We met at CrossFit. Fun story. Teresa, I'm so happy to have you here with us today. And I'm so excited to dive in around this topic that I know you love, anxiety. In your own words, Teresa, could you introduce yourself to our audience who are just discovering you?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I feel like you said all of the things. I'm a psychologist in New York City. I am a business owner, so that's another thing. I have a private practice, an office next to Bryant Park, and that's been actually fun. I've been meeting people for the first time that I've been seeing since COVID, actually. That's been fun. New adventure.
That's an exciting journey, I'm sure, because it's one thing to be a psychologist. It's really a different thing to become a business owner, right? And have your own practice.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a whole different ballgame.
So today, Teresa, I really want to talk with you and take your insights of why there could be an advantage to be anxious in the workplace for CEO. And why most of successful leaders are also sometimes struggling. So first, do you think that's correct? Or in what you've been seeing, are you saying that it's not always the case? Not all CEOs have mental health and are struggling with anxiety, or do you find that a common trait among the people that you're seeing?
Well, there's a certain type of pressure that comes with high performance jobs, right? And certain individuals navigate towards those types of jobs. So there's going to be a lot of that, and anxiety specifically a relationship to what it provides the person, because a lot of the times it can fuel. So there's a really common pattern with procrastination within anxiety that is like putting off the task and the thing that one has to do, including, for example, evaluations, right? Let's take that. And the person and the CEO or manager or boss could be putting off the evaluations and writing up the evaluations because the putting it off is actually a self-soothing mechanism. And let's just do arbitrary deadlines, right? So let's say the evaluations are due in 2 months. Then the thing that happens is you push it off, right? Oh, it's 2 months away. I don't have to worry about that. And the moment that you push it off, it facilitates a self-soothing kind of cycle, right? Until the moment where you're experiencing the deadline be more of a pressure to perform. And so the soothing mechanism with that would be to do it, because the increase of anxiety has shifted. The increase of anxiety then becomes, okay, this is coming now, I have to do it. And that pressure that can be experienced by that deadline is actually the thing that helps motivate the performance, if that makes sense.
Wow, that makes a lot of sense. And you're saying that procrastination is a soothing mechanism. So it's basically a type of toxic cycle, right? Because procrastinating is soothing and being in a rush and being kind of a shit show in the I need to get this done is also soothing. So people have the tendency to just keep that cycle, even if it's not the most comfortable to them.
Right. And also, there's an attachment to the experience of anxiety because people have relied on it. Anxiety is the thing that got me through high school, and then it's the thing that got me through university, and then it's the thing that got me my first job, right? Because there's a certain amount of pressure. And, right, with any performance, you need a certain level of arousal or anxiety in order to perform. So it is a necessary thing because it also allows your system to say, hey, I actually care about this thing, whatever the thing is, right? Getting into this school, getting this job, I actually care about it. And because I care about it, I have a certain level of anxiety. And because I have a certain level of anxiety, I'm going to perform essentially better than if you didn't have any anxiety, because no anxiety would mean generally you don't care at all.
Wow. So it really sounds the way you're describing it, that you made of anxiety your friend, and you came to the conclusion of like, this is what put me to school. This is what helped me go there. So you're really actually leveraging your anxiety and making friend with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the things that can hinder the progress or process within therapy is you're viewing it as an asset. You're viewing it as something that you actually need in order to perform well. And you're not wrong in saying that, right? Like the person that is saying that isn't wrong in saying it. It's more of a, how do you create a better relationship to the anxiety in order to have it be better functioning or healthier?
Wow. I always saw anxiety as malfunctioning, as a burden, as a liability, meaning that, for instance, I can't regulate. When I say I, it's also people around me. For me, if they get anxious, it's a sign of you don't have it together. You shouldn't be anxious. Um, you should be at peace if you're doing what you like doing. If you know how to work with yourself, you shouldn't be so stressed. You shouldn't be so anxious. It shouldn't feel that hard. You shouldn't procrastinate. But you're normalizing anxiety and seeing it as a quality almost, and as a source, not a source of motivation, but you're making it your ally really, and you're not judgmental about it.
Oh, no. Well, that's the thing. Anxiety is an experience that every living being has, right? Because the system is geared towards survival. So, for example, we're in New York City. If we cross the street and cars have a tendency to do things that typically are not common other places, if you're crossing the street, there's a certain level of arousal when you're crossing the street so that you can be aware of your surroundings and also survive the crossing of the street. And that is an experience of anxiety, along with, a fire alarm goes off. That's also an experience of anxiety. It's essentially your system going in a automatic response so that the body stays alive. So everyone has an experience of anxiety. It's more the relationship that you create with it that you perceive as the reason for your success could be the thing that becomes unhealthy.
But then if you reframe anxiety like that, then why would people want to try to mitigate their anxiety or reduce it, since it's also a very positive force and a creative force? Why would people want to try to have less anxiety if it can help them be high achievers?
Well, it's not really meant to be sustained over prolonged periods of time. The example that I usually hear, especially because I hear a lot of information, right? I listen to podcasts and books and such. The common example is when, for example, a predator goes after prey in the wild, the prey automatically reacts and goes to safety. And when it gets to safety, it automatically goes back to its grazing or whatever the activity it was doing before the predator. And that's because its time frame is stamped to the moment where it was hunted. They recognize, okay, the threat is over. I could go back to my regular activity. Whereas we don't do that because we remember. Also, we kind of take the threat out of context, right? So there's a distinct difference between being on a hike and making eye contact with a bear, being on stage and moving your mouth like in front of people. Those are different things, even though the experience could be similar, that, oh my goodness, I'm going to die. Those two things are not necessarily comparative in situation sense. The internal experience is the same. That's kind of what we're dealing with, the modern day anxiety.
And Dr. T, 49% of CEOs experience mental health issues, nearly double the general population. Yet we expect these people to lead companies worth billions. What do you think about that?
Well, one is that it means they care. So that's one thing that I would also make sure that we're taking into account is there's a high level of anxiety because they care about their performance and they care about what it means to have their job and the title and also how it impacts others. So that taken into account, there is a way of changing the relationship to anxiety where it doesn't become so. Generally, when increased levels of anxiety happen, creates things like panic attacks, which basically prevents the person from actually taking action or doing a function. And there are several ways of preventing that. We are in a high stress environment right now, especially with technologies advancing and all these other things. So it does make sense for that number to be what it is. It's more about, okay, how are you relating to it? Because that would tell you more information than just the statistic.
And Dr. T, you've worked with executives who make $1 million decisions daily, but can't decide what to have for lunch without spiraling. What is it about it?
It's a decision paralysis. It has to do when there are too many options available to a person. The image that I usually use, or the example that I often give, is, going to the grocery store, being in front of the toilet paper and deciding what toilet paper. It's kind of like there's just too many options, right? Soft, rough, the double, this, that. It's just toilet paper. Like, just pick one and move on. But the paralysis happens because, in New York City, there's a gajillion restaurants divided by countries, and so it's a lot, especially because you're having to deal with decisions just all of the time, all day. And that's where there's an interesting dynamic that happens in relationships where people that are in charge, especially at work, want to be in a relationship where they don't have to be in charge. And that creates the balance. So in the personal life, hey, I have made 20 decisions that have changed the lives of X amount of people. Can you just pick the dinner, honey?
Yeah.
I'm done. I'm over it.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. They say it's lonely at the top, but what does that actual loneliness do to a personal mental health?
Well, you know what? I feel like when people say that, there's so much that is based on responsibility, right? So a part of what is being said with that statement, and potentially not being said, is that the decision falls on the person making it. So let's just say there's a manager and they have a team meeting and people say, I think this is a good idea. I think that's a good idea. The decision will fall on the head of the table, right? So that's what becomes the lonely piece too, is you're taking on the responsibility and also showing up for the actions that you made, which is not often something easy to do for people. I also treat couples, and taking responsibility is really hard in a couple. So I imagine that that definitely plays into the being lonely at the top, because it just falls on you.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't just say, well, Joe told me to do it, because that's not going to work.
And so when everyone around you is expecting you to have all the answers, where do you go to?
I feel like there's a bit of it that has to do with being able to say, I'm going to look into that, or not needing to respond right away. Or if it calls for just saying, I don't know, even though there is an expectation for the person being asked to know, putting it off would be, I'm going to need more time for that. Or if it's a situation that the person can be comfortable just saying, I have no idea. You should ask so and so. It's almost like people don't want to admit when they don't know, especially because there can be an assumption that, man, I really should know this. And you can't know everything, right? So giving yourself grace for things like that.
And do you think that boards should require CEOs to have therapists or psychologists, just like they require CFOs to have accountants?
I want to say I want to say that's a case by case basis. I feel that would merit a case by case basis and a discussion. I feel like it should be a discussion about, would this be beneficial? It depends on how the person processes. I'll give you an example so that it could be a little clearer. Sometimes being physical, like you mentioned, I do CrossFit, I do. And now I've increased to 6 to 7 times a week, just throwing that out there. Sometimes being physical and being in your physical body and taking that time to unplug in that way, which other people at the gym also do, can be enough to, one, create levels of stress intentionally and on purpose that creates a healthy management of stress. So when you're intentionally stressing your body physically, and you're creating that and a habit of recovering from that, is you're also telling your body that you can withstand stress and overcome it. So would I say it should be something that is obliged? No. And at the same time, that doesn't mean that conversation shouldn't be a bigger conversation, right? So a bigger conversation in the sense of, what are you doing for self-care, mental health? Do you need assistance?
And so with the parallel of CrossFit and the good stress, right, that you're trying to get from that exercise, do you feel that we're not equipped the same with the amount of stress that we can tolerate? For instance, my physical therapist told me, you can do 3 times CrossFit, not 5, 6 times, because I used to do 5, 6 times with you. And she nicely told me, more like 3 times. It's good. 3 times, that's your max, so that I wouldn't hurt myself. So do you think that's something that you can change bit by bit, or do you feel people are just like, you can do 5, 6 times a week, 5 to 7 times a week, and other people, 3 is their max?
Don't really know like that. I'm not sure about, and I feel like that one has to do with preference, and the other piece would have to do with physical conditioning as well. But I do know that the experience of putting your body intentionally through stress and over time creates this ability to change and adapt.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, Yeah, I don't know if there's a difference between people that go 7 times versus 3.
Oh, there's a difference. And Teresa, what do you think happens to someone's mental health when thousands of jobs depend on their decisions?
It's a lot to take on, right? It's a big responsibility again with that term. And a lot of it has to do with their ability to kind of allow for the decision to be made with discernment and how much assistance that and support that they're getting. So it also goes into the bigger picture of the company as well, whether the company is really actually focusing on an improvement versus a cut for cut's sake. So trimming the fat versus we genuinely don't have work for you anymore, meaning there's a lot that has been shifting to jobs for AI versus actual people, and that's going to continue to increase over time. So then that means we don't have the work for you to do. So then we literally don't have anything for you. And that can create a dynamic shift, but it has the potential to be a good shift, meaning that can create an avenue for that person to go into another area or learn something else. I feel like the same shift happened with the start of the computer and internet, right? There was this idea of computers will take over all of our jobs. No, kind of. And at the same time, the jobs just shifted. So going back to the decision making, it would be also good to look at, well, if this is a company I believe in and the trajectory that we're heading in is positive, meaning there is this cut, but at some point it will shift to include more people or grow in a different area. That can be a very big change, right? So the distinction between feeling positive about making that sort of decision and part of it is part of business, right? So being able to kind of hold both in a balance, knowing that you're responsible.
In a sense, are you saying that anxiety is the price of admission to be a successful CEO?
To some extent, there is some level of anxiety for performance. And at the same time, it's kind of like a trick question. So like yes and no. The yes bit is because it is a known fact that there's a specific level of anxiety that is needed for performance. And at the same time, you can have some anxiety and have it be a healthy relationship, meaning all people that are alive also feel sad. That doesn't mean they have major depressive disorder. So there's that distinction of it can be a healthy relationship to anxiety. And so I wouldn't say you need to have anxiety to be a successful CEO. No.
And what would you say are some red flags that a high achieving CEO is heading toward a breakdown?
How they disconnect, the boundaries that the person has with work, if there's compartmentalization. So let's say there's long work hours, because there are. And let's say that, the boundaries are, for example, I start work at 8 and end around 7. And if someone needs me, they can contact this specific line, right? But then at 7, you should really be doing something else. Like you should be out to dinner, or there should be an event or a clear indication to the body, the self, and the system that you're no longer working. And things like routines, like sleep hygiene, healthy relationships, if the person likes their family, if the person has, the pottery class that they go to every Wednesday, right? Mm-hmm. These are the things that will create a whole person versus just the CEO part, or the
Mhm.
CEO piece.
And so, how do you tell the difference between normal CEO stress and clinical anxiety?
Their ability to manage it. So the distress would be not being able to sleep, impacting their life, impacting their relationships. At some stage, it impacts work, right? So when anxiety becomes so overwhelming that they stop being able to respond to deadlines, stop being able to essentially perform, because at some stage, there's a right level of anxiety, but then it exceeds that level.
Sorry, can you say that again?
There's a right level of anxiety and then it exceeds that level. And when that level is exceeded, then the performance goes down. When it becomes unmanageable and impacts various facets of their life, that's when it becomes problematic.
And what do you think would happen if CEOs admitted that they were struggling? Do you think the stock price would crash, or do you think trust would increase?
It depends. I feel there could be an avenue for someone to say, I have this experience. I have this experience with anxiety. These are the things that I'm doing with it, for it. My trajectory is this, right? So if it's just expressing, hey, this is something I'm dealing with, there's a lot of ambiguity that comes with it. I feel there's an avenue for to be vulnerable in that way with self-awareness, recognition, and a plan and a strategy. Almost be self-soothing for the listener, right? Yeah.
And what do you think about the fact that some CEOs spend thousands, millions sometimes on research for the company, but they won't spend an hour of their time for mental health? What do you think is behind that?
Oftentimes the things that help are the things that really don't make sense to us. So, for example, it is known that we as human beings don't have the capacity to focus and attend to things longer than a specific amount of time. Ideally, 20 minutes is a good stretch. It changes when there's an experience of flow, but that's a different kind of experience, and that's not an experience that people generally are expected to have at work or sustain, and not something that you can tell your body to do between like 8 and 4 or whatever. For example, with attention focus, 20 minutes, 45, and then being able to take a break. Now, this gets interesting because there's the work from home, and what is a break? Is a break a 45-minute TV show? Like that gets a little dicey, but the things that do help would be to take a break. Is that something that makes logical sense? Hey, I have a deadline that's due next week on this thing, and I'm literally banging my head against the wall. I can't take a break. I need to do this. And that's counterproductive. And sometimes the things that actually, generally, most things that help anxiety seem counterproductive, and also things that people don't want to do, which makes my job interesting.
So, taking breaks is one of them, but what's maybe two other things that every executive could or should do for their mental health and that most don't?
Feel. So there's everything related to anxiety is avoidance of this experience, this feeling, that whatever. And the most important thing would be to stop avoiding, which is literally the hardest thing, right? So the example I have for this is, let's say I'm in the home of someone that has agoraphobia, a person that doesn't want to leave their home, right? The first step would be to get them to face the door wherever they are in the room. And then the next step would be to take a step towards the door and then another, right? And we're talking about being several feet away. So let's give it a distance. Let's say we're 10 feet away from the door. Can you get to 9 feet closer to the door? You're still inside. The reason why that's so challenging is that there's an automatic spike of anxiety that happens when their proximity to the door decreases. So you're getting closer and closer to the door, and that's the thing that you need to do in order to get out. But the tendency is to go against it because you want to avoid the spike of anxiety. So all of that is avoidance. So the number one thing that would help would be not to avoid, which is the hardest thing to do, given the example, right? This would be an example of someone that experiences a life-threatening anxiety from leaving their apartment. That means they're correlating, if I leave, I will die. So the thing that they need to do is go up to the experience that they don't want to experience, that they've been avoiding this whole time. That's the thing. That's where the money is. And that's the hardest bit. So you said 2 more. So take a break for sure. Feel all of the things that you've been avoiding feeling. I would say the second one would be really have an understanding of control. A lot of the things with anxiety are connected to and related to control. And a lot of the things that are looked at are things outside of our control. So, brilliant example. Oftentimes, it's changed over time, but in the past, I've gotten men come to me for therapy, and right from the beginning, they say, blank woman in my life wants me to be here, and it's either mom or wife or partner or whatever. And that's because there's this dynamic with control, meaning my partner here needs to change, but that's not within their control. So they're bringing it to me, right? Mm-hmm. So really recognizing where, when, and how you have control, which is really yourself.
And that's number 2. What is your number 3?
Well, take a break, stop avoiding feeling. So go towards the feeling and relationship to control. I would say the fourth one, if you want another one, would be your relationship to fear. So going back to the avoidance, I feel like we can tie in fear, which is there's a lot of avoidance of fears of inadequacy, fears of incompetence, fears of all kinds of things, right? So tying back the example of procrastination, a common dynamic that happens is the person wants to have an out. So yeah, those evaluations that I did, really, I only did them in a week. So if they're not good, right, it's almost like you're allowing yourself an out of, it's not because I'm not competent, I'm not this, I'm not that, I'm not whatever. It's more of I only had this much time because I'm so busy, or I'm so needing to do other things, or this or that there's a bit that creates a out that could be related to a fear.
So it's a protection mechanism. So if you wait last minute to do something and you procrastinate until the very end, then you can always say, oh, also, if it's not that great, it's also because I did it in 2 seconds. I didn't have the time.
Yeah.
So you talk about avoidance, and I hear you when you say you just need to face the avoidance. How do you do that pragmatically when there is something you really don't want to be doing, whether it's sending that proposal, going on that meeting, do that presentation? What can you tell yourself to push through? And also, is that always the healthy way to push through in these situations, even though your body and everything is telling you, don't do it, don't do it. It feels like life and death. So is that always healthy to go through the life and death feeling?
Okay, so do you mean how do I do it personally, my person?
How do we do it, all of us entrepreneurs?
Okay, so I'll start with I, and then I can go with we. So I don't know. I'm sure I've told you I've been working on doing handstands at the gym. Yeah. Well, I was petrified of going upside down.
Really? I didn't know.
Yeah.
I never paid attention. You kept it to yourself? You didn't say, "Oh, I'm
No,
sketching."
no. I told everyone. I was
Okay.
like, I don't want to do this. And I would do it after the workouts, usually sometimes before when I didn't have time. It was the perpetual, I'm going to work on this thing that I'm afraid of because I want to be able to stand up to it. Right? That's a literal physical thing. And I will admit right now that I have been able to do it. I've been able to kick up to the wall. I haven't gotten to the point where I feel comfortable or safe enough to do a handstand push-up. So when I have to do a handstand push-up, it's always wall facing. I'm working on it. It's a work in progress, but I'm strong enough to do the push-up.
Yeah.
Yeah. For me personally, I try to go towards it. I feel I get more reward from inching in, and that's with relation, right? So with this specific example, it was literally hours of very not entertaining, just trying to kick myself up to the wall. And there was a lot of failure that happened in between. So that's kind of like to give you an actual visual. I would say that to answer your latter question, and we can go into the we, is I feel like there's a difference between the gut, your gut telling you this is not something that you like, this is not something you want to do. An example would be, if your parents are attorneys and all of your siblings are attorneys and you kind of come from a family that breeds attorneys, should you be an attorney even though you actually, I don't know, want to write sci-fi novels? Then there's that discrepancy has to be taken into consideration, because you're looking at it is your internal self system telling you, actually, you don't care about the law. Why would this make sense? If you actually want something and you're afraid that you'll fail, or if you actually want something and you're afraid you're not good enough, or if you actually want something and you're afraid you will be good enough. All of those things are very different, and you would want to go towards that because it would mean that you're actually tapping into something that's deeply meaningful. And because it's deeply meaningful, there's a lot of weight to it.
So essentially, when the avoidance comes and the fear comes, it's really about trying to understand where that fear is coming from, because then you can decide whether it's legit fear or it's really like you're not interested, you don't want to become a lawyer, versus the fear of growth, or maybe it's the unknown, or maybe it's imposter syndrome. So it's really figuring out what's the source of the fear and whether it's worth pushing or not.
Yeah. And whether it's something that you actually want.
And that's going to lead to growth. And Dr. T, Teresa, what made you want to work specifically with high achieving executives and their mental health?
I find the dynamic with anxiety really fascinating. I mean, I understand it really well. I get why it happens and how it happens. And what creates such a fascination, especially for me, is that there's this idea of something coming in and taking over, that something taking over. I don't know, it's just like so fascinating. And the way that I would describe that as another analogy is, it's almost like anxiety comes to knock on your door. You open the door, it asks for your car keys. You give them your car keys and it says, I'm going to take you for a ride. And you don't, push back. You give them the car keys and then you get in the car and you don't know for how long you're going to be there. You don't know where you're going. You don't know how fast they're going to drive. You don't know what the destination is. Is it going to take an hour? Is it going to take 5? It's very fascinating to be taken by anxiety. And it's something I understand really clearly.
And what is the most surprising thing that you've learned about CEO anxiety?
That there's an attachment to it that they don't want to let go of. So it's almost like we're doing the work and then they realize, oh, but what if I need this? I feel like when I happened upon that, because my goal was, let's get you into a better relationship with this. There was proximity to that. There was almost like a backlash of fear of, oh my God, if I lose this, will I be shit at my job? And I'm like, no, I don't think so. But I happened upon that quite some time ago, and I was like, well, this is also a choice. You can choose to keep it, and that's actually a conversation that I do have with people.
And if you could change one thing about how society views executive mental health, what would it be?
It happens. We're all human, right? And being able to have grace for that and patience for that. I mean, right? It's not because they have a title that they don't have these experiences like the rest of us, right? So it's more of a understanding that it can happen to anyone, it can happen to everyone, and we're all the same in that way, which is kind of a relief, right? We're all the same in that way.
I love that. Thank you so much, Teresa. This was such an insightful episode. I'm sure it's going to be so helpful to so many people in our audience who are high achievers and have big goals and are wondering how to manage their anxiety. It was really a pleasure having you here today.
Thanks for having me.
And that wraps up today's episode. I am Anne-Lise Cailliez, and I can't wait to join you again next week. Thanks for listening to Parlez-Vous CEO today. If you enjoyed the show, leave a 5-star review. It helps us keep going. And connect with us on Instagram at Parlez-Vous CEO. I am Anne-Lise Cailliez, and I know some days are harder than others. On those tough days, think back to why you started. What you're doing today matters, even when you can't see the results yet. Ideas are great, but it's what you do with them that counts. Find everything we talked about today at parlezvousceo.com. See you next week, and you've got this.